knowledge, part of the knowledge that informed the tools, the frameworks, the methods, and so on that could guide evaluation in Africa and in other parts of the world where the knowledge systems have been marginalized in preference of knowledge systems from Western knowledge systems or knowledge systems from the first world. That was long. Over to you, Jeannie.
Well, thank you, Bagele. And it is true, I tracked her down in Cote d'Ivoire to sign the book that she wrote, in part because it really was almost like a rescue for me when I was in graduate school, because I was seeking something to sink my teeth into in terms of to really grapple with this integration of knowledge, right? Holding on to what is valuable, but making space for other knowledges that are equally valuable, and how to do that in a way that is respectful. And I will say I have formal training in the natural sciences. So, I enter evaluation. I think I've always been an evaluative thinker. Like I said, I formally found the field later, but with training in ecological sciences, everything is focused on the integration, right? And the interaction and the integration, not just between things that are living within different systems, but also non-living components. And so thinking more expansively about how to do that in the field of evaluation. And honestly, anyone who willingly reads your dissertation, you are destined to be close to probably for the rest of your life. So when Bagele told me she read my dissertation, I was very humbled and also knew that we had a friendship bond that could not be broken. And so we started to seek ways that we could collaborate together. And when the opportunity came to write together, and we'll talk about the chapter in a moment, but when this opportunity came, I knew exactly the person that I wanted to conceptualize a chapter with and write with. And so Bagele and I decided to enter into a writing partnership. And we strongly believe that writing partnerships can serve as an important steps toward decolonizing evaluation literature. And I say that knowing that I have published as an independent author without a co-author. So I recognize it's not always easy to locate and identify folks to publish with, but I think the difference for this chapter is we partnered together from the inception of the chapter. And that would be an encouragement to all of you, thinking creatively about, your ideas. There is somebody out there who has similar ideas to you, and trying to find those people and work collaboratively with them. I think when we were thinking about what do we want to say about our writing partnership, what you see on this screen is really what we would want to share, right? The co-creation of knowledge. So we both bring our own knowledges and understanding into this writing partnership, but then it's through the dialogue that understanding grows. And I do think there's a bit of, for me as an author, I always, and as a writer, when we publish something in print, it almost becomes a static entity, right? It's in print, but whatever you have read, that at least I can speak for me, that I have written, by the time you get it, it's already, because of the publishing delays, my ideas and my thoughts have already grown and evolved, right? So it's hard to capture that in the academic literature, the growth and the ongoing fluidity of our thoughts and our ideas as we engage with others' ideas. And also with writing partnerships, it helps us transcend those disciplinary boundaries. Evaluation is a transdiscipline, right? And thinking about, well, how do we actively engage? And it can be intimidating. Bagele is so well versed in evaluation, has so much more experience and knowledge than I bring to the table. But her welcome of me into that co-authoring space with her, it has just been so encouraging to me. And I hope I've been able to encourage her as well. And then we think a lot about, the ontological and epistemic diversity. So bringing our different understandings of what is reality and how do we know about reality? How do we know, you know, about the realities that we exist in and others that exist, and how can they be integrated together into some final product that is respectful and fully integrative. And then obviously the critical reflection and reflexivity. So I think, Bagele, we've modeled this in our writing partnership. Do you want to add anything else before we step into the chapter?
No, I think we have said it so eloquently. Let's move on.
All right. So there is, and you've been hearing about this book that is coming out, I think maybe in August. It will be released. I'm not sure. Core Concepts in Evaluation, edited by Lori and many other names here in Lissa that you are familiar with, especially for those who are in the space of Western Michigan. So Bagele and I have a chapter, and it's The Power and Politics of Knowledge Production and Program Evaluation, Funder, Methodological, and Pedagogical Colonialism. And so what we want to do today is just kind of introduce you to some of our thinking. We want to encourage you to read the chapter in the book, so we're not going to give all the details in this presentation, but we really just want to have a conversation with everybody because our ideas are still, like I said, evolving and growing as well. But we've noticed some things together and individually that we are so grateful that we were given the opportunity to kind of pull our ideas together. And I do want to just, at least for me, acknowledge that pretty much I don't feel I've had an original idea ever. All of my ideas are always scaffolded and built off of other people's ideas writings that I have read, and those writings have sparked some thoughts in my brain. And so I want to just acknowledge that our chapter really is we're pulling together a lot of others' ideas as well, and just trying to bring them into one space, which is focused on this particular thesis for the chapter. And what we were charged with doing was reading a classic work, and that work was by Eleanor Chilima. And the title of that work was What Have We Learned About the Politics of Program Evaluation? And I'll just say a few words about the work itself. It was Chilima published it in 1987, and she was the head of, for those of you who may not know, she was the head of the Program Evaluation Methodology Division at the GAO. And so the context really was kind of congressional reporting and policy making, and what is the role of the evaluator in that space, right? In that public policy context. And so in that space, in her writing, she reflects on evaluation's purpose as providing high quality information to decision makers so that the high quality information can inform policy making, but recognizing that it doesn't always work, right? Evaluations are not always used in decision making and in policy making. And there are various reasons presented in her chapter, which is also published in the book that you can read, in terms of why that might be the case. And one of the things that Bagele already referenced that we'll reference throughout is Chilima touched upon this notion that fundamentally evaluators have resisted changes to our paradigms, right? And so one of the things we'll talk about later is those changes to paradigms. But she mentions in this chapter that this particular quotation struck us. which is without an understanding of politics, we cannot understand, or worse, we actively misunderstand. And there's this concept of agnotology, which is kind of the intentional production of ignorance, right? Where we have access to knowledge, but we intentionally ignore it or refute it. And that active misunderstanding, I think, is a warning for all evaluators, right? When we step into that space of knowledge, now we have responsibility. And so Chilipsky's article kind of calls us to that responsibility and thinking about, what is that responsibility? And so when you're reading her chapter, she kind of breaks things down. We just call it, I don't think it's formally referred to as the Chilipsky 5-step framework. That's just kind of how we engaged with her chapter, her article, that we then reflected on. And she talks about evaluators as translators. And for those of you who have been in spaces before where you were dependent upon someone translating information for you, maybe because of language or just context, we have awareness then that translators have power, right? Translators hold power in terms of being that intermediary between where the knowledge is generated and then the end user or recipient of that knowledge. And evaluators stand firmly in that space as translators. And so Chilipsky identifies at least 5 concrete ways in which evaluators play this role as translators. And this was particularly in the context of her writing in terms of policy development and policy evaluations. But whether it's developing the policy question or translating the policy question into an evaluation question, or translating the evaluation question into a design, or translating the findings into answers to the original policy question, and then how to even use those findings to inform new policy questions. And if we're looking at all of this, at each step in this framework, I think we can all acknowledge that politics and power, because we can't separate those two, that politics and power come into play, and that there's an imbalance then. There can be imbalances in the power of evaluation because of our position as evaluators and our responsibility in translation. So before we move on, Bagele, do you want to add anything to that?
No. Continue.
All right. So do you want to talk about this slide, Bagele, or do you want me to talk through it?
No, just talk about it.
Okay, all right. So what Bagele and I did was we applied a decolonizing lens to Chilipsky's work. And although Chilipsky was writing in a very kind of narrow context, we saw, and writing back in 1987, we saw hints at what we would collectively categorize underneath, currently this lens of decolonizing evaluation. So there were several elements of her work that aligned with this modern call. So one, Chilipsky recognized the need to embrace inclusive dialogue and drawing attention to basically the rare event of evaluators talking to one another, let alone legislators. She said, evaluators, you need to be breaking down silos. You need to build bridges of communication between yourselves as a group, but then also the users and individuals who are engaged with the evaluation. And then she said that that is going to require that evaluators shift power away from themselves. And that's that power rebalancing, that awareness, first of all, that, oh, yeah, like evaluators do hold power as translators of knowledge. And then evaluators taking the conscious step to shift power away from themselves as they're seeking input from others throughout the whole evaluation cycle. And then Chilisa also, in these 2 points, is emphasizing building and nurturing relationships. Maybe she discusses that in a more limited way than what is discussed currently in the evaluation sector, but talking about the importance of those relationships. And it's not just data collection and data analysis, it's really a relational field, and building those relationships is important so that evaluators can have a broader understanding of the context of the evaluation. And then she also, it's clear in her, you'll probably pick up on it, there's definitely a tension between kind of these more objective measures and then what we typically describe as subjective. Although I will say, and I've always taught my students, at least in the natural sciences, all of these different ways are very important to our understanding and knowing, but she really challenges evaluators to embrace multiple ways of knowing. And that is definitely something that we have been talking about in the field of evaluation. So although Chilisa's work is pretty much limited to kind of government programming and policy evaluation, here we kind of saw these elements. And so our modern spin and analysis of her work is that we need to continue to identify the ways that power and politics are impacting knowledge production, translation, and transfer. And so I'm going to turn this over to Bagele for just kind of a brief introduction to these 3 ways that colonialism, in our perspective, shows up in evaluation. And so, Bagele, do you want to step through this a little bit?
Okay, so when we talk of funding in evaluation, we are talking about power dynamics between the funders and the commissioners and the evaluators and communities or sometimes governments. So basically what happens is that most of the time, the funders will determine what they think they can fund, and they will go on to dictate, for lack of a better term, what methodologies can be used in the work that they are funding. Then the evaluators, who are translators, as Jeannie said, they will go ahead and translate what the funders require. They will translate that and take it to the communities. So in that process, we see again what we've called methodological colonialism, a situation where now the methods have been decided by the funders or influenced by the funders, and the evaluators now take those suggested or required methods or preferred methods And most of the time, these are methods and methodologies and tools that have been, that were designed in the West. There is nothing wrong with the tools coming from the West. What is disturbing is the fact that sometimes those methods and tools are not contextualized, but they are applied as taken from a textbook or from a book of tools of evaluation tools and methods. So in the process, you find that these methodologies, these tools are embedded in certain ways of knowing. They are embedded in, and when you look at the literature that informs evaluation in the West, you find that people normally talk of evaluation branches, where you have the methods branch that emphasizes on quantitative methodologies, quantitative designs, and then you have the use where the emphasis is on making sure that evaluation results are used, and you have the value branch and the transformative. But when you look at this and you look at the ontology, the epistemology, the value that inform these knowledge in each one of those branches, you find that it is based on the culture and the experiences of Western communities. You take, for example, the good example is the log frame. We know that the log frame started in the US, and it started with the soldiers trying to figure out how to address some problems. So, and then the log frame became a cookbook that every evaluator, when they come to Africa, we have got to use the log frame without actually trying to contextualize the log frame in such a way that it addresses the dynamics and the context and the culture and the values in those communities. So we have called that methodological colonialism. Then we have the pedagogy. The pedagogical colonialism, it refers to the marketing of knowledge systems, evaluation knowledge systems from the West. You go in most of the academic institutions, they use textbooks from the West, and in most of those textbooks, what is lacking is other knowledge systems from the third world, from developing countries, from Africa, for example. You'll find that what is sold, of course, is the tools and methods and methodologies that were developed in the West and are therefore more relevant, are contact dependent on communities in the West. So pedagogical colonialism is not a fault of Western evaluators and writers and authors. It's just that there has to be a recognition that for us to be able to do better evaluation. Students, whether they are in the West or the East or the North, they have to be exposed to multiple ways of knowing, to multiple epistemologies, and that there has to be an effort by evaluators also when they do evaluation, like evaluators from the North, when they do evaluation in the South, they also have to make an effort to develop tools that are grounded in the cultures of the communities where they do evaluation, instead of just relying on those that they know, those that they have created, because sometimes it's also a question of Western evaluators trying to market the tools that they've created and forgetting that they created those tools in different contexts. And so that is more or less about pedagogical colonialism. Jeannie, you can
All right.
add. Yeah.
No, I think that's really great. I think that steps us right into what we really want to do for the rest of the time together with everyone is create spaces for you to share. And, you know, I want to acknowledge that sharing requires vulnerability. And so if you don't feel safe to share an experience that you've had, then by no means are you expected to. But we have 3 different slides. And the first one really is, in what ways have you either experienced firsthand, have been part of, or have witnessed or have read about in terms of funder colonialism? And so we have, you can join here. This is the embedded part. Slido's new tool. I'm shameless. I don't, this is the first time I've ever used Slido. So, but if you want to go to slido.com and type in that number and I'm just going to stop talking and give you a few minutes to reflect on the question and then share briefly any experiences that you have had with funder colonialism. Mm-hmm. And when you're in Slido, this will stay open so you can continue to add to it even if we move on. And there's also a Q&A in the Slido field, and that's open as well. So you can always drop questions in there. Well, it's very clear. I think, Bagele, a lot of what we've talked about is showing up in this list. So if anything, this is recognition that we do have a problem. which needs to be addressed, right? And evaluators are right in the thick of it. And in the chapter, we talk a little bit about communities' responses to some of these expectations and how sometimes, field staff of programs that are subjugated to these funding demands will use, what some might call as dishonest reporting, others call as community empowering reporting, right? To just ensure that the community is protected. And so it definitely adds a level of complexity to an evaluator's work and engagement with community participants and partners, as well as funders, as translators back and forth. So, and we can share, Samantha, I'm not sure how to do that, but I can definitely share this out with you so that all participants can see some of the shared experiences that are populating.
Yeah, that's perfect. I can add it to like with the recording of this presentation where they can link to it.
Okay, great. I'll have to figure that out. So the second question is very similar. Bagele stepped through how we are thinking about methodological colonialism. And so we want to know, again, similarly, in what ways have you experienced methodological colonialism? And I think it's really important to acknowledge that we're not throwing out any individual method, but we are trying to emphasize that each method that may be selected that selection process needs to be made through the lens of critical thinking and decolonization and thinking about how the methods that we select may or may not enhance a community, and thinking about the contextualization of the method. And so the log frame, we provide a study as you're typing and thinking. I'll just share this with you. You may find it in the chapter. Some of this feedback. So back in 2006, Bornstein published an article where she reflected, it was quite an expansive study on just the NGOs' use of logical framework approach with M&E, monitoring and evaluation approaches in South Africa. And some of the qualitative feedback that she got was, in one case, one grantee said, it doesn't feel like a space to talk honestly about what's working well and what isn't working well, because the risk that comes with being totally honest and transparent is losing funding. So once again, going back to that funding piece. So, and when you read the chapter, you can read more about this, but these two things are often tied together. So I'll just be quiet so you can think. Sorry about that. Really great insights and observations. Thank you for rigor, not recognizing the value and strength of Indigenous methods. So hopefully you were all able to, I was trying to scroll through them as they were coming in, and I can't quite figure out how to do that. So hopefully you're all able to capture some of the shared experiences. And then lastly, because we do want to have some time to get to some of the recommendations that we present in the chapter, in what ways have you experienced pedagogical colonialism? And this is kind of linked to the story that I shared at the beginning with my discovery of Bagele's book, which then opened up a whole world for me of many other authors, many other Indigenous authors, research methodologies, Sean Wilson, Kovac, so many other authors that write and explain Indigenous methodologies and research strategies. But that was an experience of pedagogical colonialism that I had even in my graduate program, thinking about, well, what texts was I required to read, and how many different perspectives and ways of knowing were represented in those textbooks. So particularly for those of you who are in the space, who are students, reflect on the required readings and how representative are the required readings in your program. And then I guess I would just say, see if you can do something about it. I attempted to do something about it at my institution. At minimum, sharing, books that you have read that are informing your evaluation development, and sharing those with your faculty or supervisors. Mm-hmm. Right. Yes. And we definitely know that the road into higher ed as a professor is very limiting. And makes it very difficult for many individuals to enter that space who are fully qualified to be there, because what counts as knowledge and what counts as valid experience is often defined in a very narrow way. Mm-hmm. Feeling pressured, yeah, to just cite those that have already been cited. Yeah. Great examples. Thank you for sharing. So, be encouraged. I guess we'll just say this. Time passes, experience broadens, and we learn new things. And this was Klemsky writing in her paper that we reviewed. And definitely time has passed since she wrote those words. And it's, I think, a call for us as evaluators to not become static in our approaches to evaluation, but to always be pursuing our own continuous improvement as evaluators and broadening our understandings and learning new things and helping others in the field, supporting one another as we learn new things. And what we then we thought about these 3 areas of colonization. I know we're getting down to time, but we wanted to leave you in the chapter with hope. We are very hopeful people. And so we do have hope. We do know that the field is kind of in a place of reckoning, and we've reached this tipping point, and we're trying to decide, what are we going to do? How are we going to move forward? And I know earlier in this series, Felicia, the president of AEA, spoke and talked about, what is AEA doing moving forward? How do we want to be different? And who should be in this space, right? And so in the chapter, we propose solutions that are not simple. I mean, on the screen here, it just seems like a few simple words, but in practice and implementing these solutions, these are not simple solutions. So if you were able to be at AEA for the conference last year, you had an opportunity, hopefully, to hear from Edgar Villanueva. I'm not sure because of the way my screen is, I don't know if you can see this, but Decolonizing Wealth, which I was really thrilled that he was invited to be a speaker at AEA. And a lot of what we write in the chapter references his text, so please get it. If you have friends in philanthropy, share it with them, as I have done, and then invite them into conversations, right? So change happens through relationship and understanding. And Villanueva emphasizes the need for connections and relations and belonging. And this is not easy work, it's time-consuming work. And for some of us, it's going to take more work than others based on our own positionality and where we stand. So Bagele, do you want to say anything in terms of what you have seen happening in the African context? Has there been any movement forward in this regard?
Obviously, I think there is a movement, they call it a movement on decolonization. And I see a lot of relationship building between researchers in the South and researchers in the North. There is an attempt to try to address some of these power dynamics that are involved in knowledge production. And what I find appealing is attempts by some of the Western scholars in some of the universities, for example, in the US, who have started to bring in multiple epistemologies, especially those knowledge systems that have been marginalized for some time. I've heard people say, for example, oh, I have referenced your book. My students are using your book. And we have seen what is changing now is that when professors in the West, for example, in the US, when they have students coming from Africa, they try to encourage them to contextualize their studies. They encourage them to use these other marginalized knowledge systems that are visible, that are accessible. So there is an attempt to build those kind of relationships, and these are relationships that appreciate integration of knowledge systems. These are relationships that seek equity in knowledge system, that see all knowledge system as equal. And these are relationships that try to make visible those knowledge systems that have been marginalized for a long time. But as somebody observed, it's difficult. Universities are trying, but as somebody said, when you have a course, a module on alternative methodologies, especially those from the South, you find that is an optional course, and it's like, okay, you can take it, but there is no deliberate attempt to make sure that every student who goes through an evaluation program has at least been exposed to alternative ways of knowing, alternative methodologies that are embedded in like other realities, other knowledge systems that have been marginalized for a long, long time. So you can add, Jeannie.
Yeah, and I think, well, thank you, Bagele. And I think that jumps us forward. And I know we're at the top of the hour thinking about the pedagogical colonialism. And I didn't want to jump over the methodological, sitting back and really thinking about our paradigms. And I would encourage all of you to begin to explore the indigenous science paradigm. And certainly you can reach out to us for some resources to do so. But Bagele just ended with, the pedagogical colonialism. We're both faculty for 30 years, and Bagele just as long, if not longer. And so we're really passionate about education and ensuring that future evaluators have resources available to them so that they can better engage and maybe not struggle so much as maybe I have struggled because of limited exposure within my formal training. So Bagele, you just touched upon that at the end, and I think we're at the top of the hour. Like I said, we'll leave that Slido open. I'll just leave it open for a little bit. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask us, feel free to reach out to us. Our contact information is here as well. And we just want to thank Samantha for inviting us into this space to share a little bit about our thoughts. And you can read more about them in the chapter in the upcoming book.
You're so welcome. And thank you both for your presentation today and everybody for joining us and participating. Slido was very cool. Thanks for testing it out on us, Jennifer. As was mentioned, this is our final evaluation cafe of the 23-24 season. So I've added a link in the chat where you can register for our mailing list. I hope you'll join it if you haven't already. We will be in touch shortly asking for feedback on sessions you've attended and any suggestions for us going forward. Being Eval Cafe, we're going to work based off of your evaluation of how we're doing. So your input is important to us. We hope you'll take a moment to fill it out. We won't leave you in suspense long. You'll be receiving an email from us later in the summer that will give you what I'm sure will be another exciting lineup to our next year's Eval Cafe. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, Bagele.
Bye.